I loved Arizona. I fell in love with Arizona the first time I went there. People have told me about the desert. You either love the desert and fall in love with it right away, or you can sort of take it or leave it. So I was one of the former groups of lovers of the Sonoran Desert. It was like something I'd never seen. It was so exotic to me that I was drawn to that place and decided to find a way to do research there any way I could.
Tell our listeners a little bit about how you got involved with studying the group of people that you were studying there.
So I became really interested in the culture of the Sonoran Desert, being a cultural anthropologist, such a rich history of people that have lived there, and the environment itself is so unique. The ecology of the Sonoran Desert, it's so diverse, and it's something that I never realized about deserts, that could be possible, that you could actually have hundreds of animals, mammals, reptiles, birds, thousands of species of plants. About 400 of those species are actually edible by humans. So I just became enamored with that and with some of the cultural traditions and the groups that live there. I ended up working with primarily Mexican American and Native American people that lived in southern Arizona.
Great. And so you got involved with studying how older generations teach the younger generations about nutrition and food. Is that right?
Yes, I was really interested in that, and specifically in generational differences in cultural knowledge, especially about foods. What I found from informal conversations there before I started my official research were that the younger generation didn't know a lot about their cultural traditions, about the Sonoran Desert wild foods, and so this knowledge was being lost in a lot of ways. So I was really interested in looking at that process of generational change in knowledge.
And then, so what did you find?
What I found was that there were real fundamental differences between what adults and what children know about the Sonoran Desert, about wild foods. Children have lost a lot of that knowledge. It's not being passed on to them as it was traditionally. And adults that know about Sonoran wild foods, they know a lot different, much more detailed information. For instance, they don't just know the name of a plant, but they would know where to find this plant, how to harvest it, what time of the year, how you would prepare and cook this, what types of recipes you'd use to eat this. I'm thinking about cactus fruits and specifically, whereas the children, when we conducted our interviews, they knew a lot of names for plants. They could recognize a lot of the plants as well, but they didn't know any of this really detailed information or skill-based knowledge.
Right. So now that you see that there's this knowledge gap, have you come up with any ways to help reintegrate more healthy eating practices or help encourage the community to move back towards that more plant-based diet?
I haven't done this specifically with my work, but there are several groups in the region there that are working on this issue exactly. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to get the adult population, especially older people like grandparents and elders in the community, especially in Native American communities, into classrooms and interacting with the younger generation, these students, to teach them something about the cultural traditions and to get them interested in wanting to learn more about some of their history. So I think that that's having a lot of success in trying to bring back some of these traditional foods into the diets there.
Right, and so this is something you studied specifically with their traditional foods, but then would you say that a similar sort of knowledge gap exists in other parts of the United States with maybe not between generations, but people not knowing what effect the foods they're eating are having on their bodies?
Yes, this is definitely happening across the United States, not just in Arizona. What we're finding is that, people are so distanced from their food sources, and a lot of this has to do with this so-called globalization of our food, but the processed prepackaged foods that we eat that have really, in a lot of ways, trained us to not even ask about where our foods come from or what ingredients are even in our foods. So we're seeing this across the board. That this is really interesting to me as a cultural anthropologist, seeing this distance that we have now from our food sources, so different from generations past.
How do we begin to find our way back from that? I mean, it seems like such a huge problem that's been building up, and it's something I'm concerned about, I think about quite a bit as well. But then at the same time, sometimes I feel so overwhelmed I don't even know where to start. You know, I live in an apartment complex, and I don't know anything about growing food. I don't have any space to do that, really. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I have a couple thoughts. One of them, just starting from looking in your own backyard or your immediate environment, is even here in Georgia. Yes, we don't have the Sonoran Desert wild foods that my research involved, but there are a lot of foods that you can find that you can harvest right in your own backyard or somewhere close to your neighborhood. Muscadine grapes, we have those growing in our yard. Pecan trees, you find those all over the place, and a couple months ago, you saw people collecting these as well, at least in the area where we live. So, those wild foods are on the landscape. It's really about trying to become aware of this and learning a little bit more about your local ecology. And there are also a lot of movements towards farmers markets and having more local foods produced, as well as restaurants that are serving local foods here in Athens. There are several.
So what are some of the key differences that you notice in people, maybe in most of us in our culture might be kind of distance from our food, like we're talking about. What are some of the key differences you notice in an area or in a culture where people are closer to their relationship with their food?
Well, one of the things that was so fascinating to me about the cultures of the Sonoran Desert is the way in which their entire lives revolved around the seasons and the food cycles and the ecology of the desert. So all of their cultural traditions, their calendars revolved around the harvesting, for example, of saguaro cactus fruit. People know what the saguaro cactus looks like. It's the icon of the Sonoran Desert. Their entire calendar was based on this plant. So the harvesting of this fruit would occur in the mid to late summer, and that would be the beginning of their calendar year, and there would be festivals that would happen as a result of harvesting these fruits and making wine from these fruits, which would be the only time of the year that you would actually have alcohol and have these types of celebrations. So they were so fundamentally tied to their food sources that to me was very interesting.
Right. It's like you almost can't avoid it. You can't not know about where your food's coming from and be consciously aware of it. Wow. So another thing that I'm interested in hearing about, my wife, I mentioned to you earlier, my wife is a counseling psychologist, and she's worked with people with eating disorders. And something that she's found is mindful eating has been kind of an up-and-coming helpful intervention for people, and I'm just wondering if you've seen any kind of shifts in how people think about any positive shifts in how people think about their relationship to food in our culture.
Yes, there is something called the slow food movement, and maybe you've heard of that before, but essentially it's really doing just what you described as mindful eating, and that also involves the mindful preparation of your food and embracing that and having this be part of your dinner ritual and having it also be part of the types of friendships that you embrace and part of the things that you do for fun, say on the weekend. Is having this gathering of people and preparing one of these meals that takes hours and hours to prepare and then eat. So I think that is a movement that's growing in the United States. I definitely don't think it's the mainstream, but I think that people are becoming more aware. I think I mentioned to you, too, that a lot of my students in my Introduction to Global Health course, we talked a little bit about food and problems with obesity in our culture, and the students are very interested in this, so much so that I'm actually teaching a new course in the fall that will look at connections between food and culture and health and disease.
Yeah, I find that fascinating. It seems like more and more there seems to be, with the younger generation of males too, that you see males cooking and being more involved in the process of eating and being more engaged with it. And I'm wondering where that shift comes from. I'd be interesting to hear your thoughts as an anthropologist. Does this have to do with seeing so many people with heart disease, what are your thoughts about this kind of shift in the younger generation?
Right. Well, I do think that it is embedded now in the younger generation's head that we do have an obesity epidemic here in the United States. I'm glad that public health message is getting out that this is a real issue. So it could be part of that. I think also that there has been a lot of successful marketing of health foods, and nutraceuticals, and you hear in the media a lot about what we should and should not be doing in terms of our health and our diet. And some of this is true, and some of it is just a good money-making scheme, but it is in people's consciousness, I think. And so I think that we're starting to see a sort of cultural shift in people's priorities with their diet and being mindful of their food.
Yeah, and foodies too. It seems it's kind of like a hip. There's kind of some cultural capital to being involved in your food.
There definitely is. There's definitely prestige foods, and luckily, if you're interested in wild foods like I am, those are sort of coming back in style. So it's, deer meat isn't something that people are eating behind closed doors necessarily, but you can actually see it being served in restaurants. But another point, though, and just looking at this sort of status and prestige with food connection, is that it's expensive to eat healthy. And so one of the things that I look at in my global health course, and we'll be looking at also in my new course that I'm preparing, is this connection between health and wealth and food and disease. And so, do we really need to have a lot of money in order to eat healthy in our society? And, what does that mean for people that don't have the economic means to buy these more nutritious foods?
Yeah, I'm interested in hearing a little bit more about that. That seems to be an issue that I keep hearing come up a lot, this connection between wealth and that you kind of need money to eat better. Is that something that is that a perceived thing, or do you think that this is a real issue, or are there ways to eat healthy on the cheap?
Well, definitely organic foods are more expensive than something that's not organic. I think we've all had that experience of going to the grocery store and doing the price comparisons,
right?
And deciding if you really want to spend that extra couple dollars. But the other thing that sometimes we may not consider is that certain neighborhoods don't have accessibility to even grocery stores that have healthy food choices. We call those food deserts. For people that look into this from a research perspective in food access. And so if you only have access to, let's say, your local gas station that has a mini mart, then you don't even have the ability to buy healthier foods. You might be able to take a bus to a grocery store in a different neighborhood that has healthier choices, but then you have to carry that food back with you. And we know that foods that are healthy for us also weigh a lot because they're heavy. They have a lot of water content, like if you can think of vegetables and produce. So you might, not make those decisions to get those foods and instead get some prepackaged foods that are a little bit lighter weight and that are easier to carry, a long distance like that. So those are just things that you don't always think about when you look at this connection between, having money and healthy food choices, location.
Right. So do you, as an educator and teaching your students about thinking about a closer connection to their food, what are ways that we can start thinking about helping other people who might not have access to higher education get more educated about food?
That's a really great question. And there have been students that I've taught in the past that have gotten really involved in campus efforts to do this. When I was at University of South Florida as a postdoc, and then at Arizona State where I was teaching, there were students that were involved in local food banks. So they were volunteering there, giving out food once a week through programs. And they were also getting involved with certain restaurants where some of their excess food that they had could be distributed as well through some of these food bank programs. So there are a lot of really unique community programs that are being started, and also that students can have opportunities to do service projects with, so that they can get involved in looking at better food choices for lower income individuals.
I'm sure you see in your research, you've seen a lot of direct correlation between junk food and health problems and health expenses.
Yes, for sure. We know that one of the best preventive medicines you can take is having a healthy diet. And, we've been doing some research recently at our Center for Global Health and looking at the role of the medical community in trying to promote healthier eating and diet and lifestyle with patients. So we've been actually looking at a cross-cultural perspective of doctors in different countries and how they manage their cardiovascular disease patients, patients of theirs that are at high risk for cardiovascular disease, maybe they're obese, and how often they discuss these types of issues with them, like diet and lifestyle. What we're finding is that in the United States, that doesn't happen that often. We have done the study also in France. We've done it in Japan, in Israel, and soon to be Croatia. And especially with the French physicians, we find that they're much more willing to talk with their patients about lifestyle and diet issues. Their relationship they have in general with their patients is a much more social relationship. The doctors from the U.S., the majority of the time that they spend in the average 15 to 20 minute doctor's appointment is spent on medication management and dealing with the side effects of that. So there's not a whole lot of time left to actually get into some of the preventive medicine discussions.
Thank you so much. I've been talking with Professor Colleen O'Brien-Cherry and about her research on obesity in southern Arizona in the Sonoran Desert. And she has a paper that's coming out this spring, so keep an eye out for that. Thank you so much, Professor. It was really nice chatting with you.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right.